Dear Laci Green, my gay male red pill moment. Hey Laci, it's Prince of Queens, one of the newer and smaller members of the skeptic anti-SJW men's rights type crowd. You probably haven't heard of me, but I'm a gay guy who came out of the closet when I was 14 years old in 1996 and grew up around several feminists all throughout my entire life, never having a severe problem with them up until around 2015 or so. You asked to hear stories about people's individual defining moments around when they decided to feel strongly against feminism. So I figured I might as well make it clear how a gay male who spent a large portion of his youth and young adult life doing queer activism and artistic endeavors, largely with a bunch of lesbians, ended up being vehemently opposed to feminism. So, a bit more about me. First off, you should know that I know personally numerous world-famous feminists that you have heard of, or might even know personally, but I'm not going to name names. I grew up in Seattle, born in 1982, so I'm 35, and I went to elementary and middle school during the peak of third wave feminism, which was super huge in Seattle, and I always remember being treated rather poorly in school by my teachers. It was always very blatantly apparent that the teachers favored girls in elementary and middle school, but of course, I just assumed that it was always like that. Every special award that was given out by the staff would basically always end up going to girls, for example. And I don't mean that it was just slightly more common for girls to be praised by teachers and in school or district-wide competitions. I mean that it was almost unanimous. Now, I was in a gifted program, and I'm not saying these girls weren't smart and talented because many of them were, but I remember numerous different instances of learning about my male classmates' stellar achievements and wondering why they were so ignored. For example, one kid was an actual piano composer by the time he was maybe 9 years old, and he performed a piano song he composed himself at a talent show. But I had no idea he did such things, and he was in my class. Another kid I knew since the 3rd grade won a poetry contest in the 8th grade, and I remember reading his poem in the book that it was published in, and it was really great. I remember thinking to myself at the time that I had no idea that these guys even did such things. But looking back on things, I also remember many instances of teachers making it a point to show the class how good they thought a girl's writing or illustrating was. They were very forward in showing off the skills of girls, but almost never the boys. But again, I never thought about that too deeply growing up, at least not in terms of associating it with feminism, which now I am starting to realize was completely connected. Regardless, basically everything changed when I got into high school and I came out as gay. Middle school was, well, middle school, and it was quite rough being both somebody who read as gay, I seemed pretty gay, and I was also chubby. But I went to an alternative high school, which was super progressive, and I was able to come out as gay within about 2 weeks, and nobody cared. Actually, it was beyond that. It was like the teachers and many of the students were thrilled that I was gay. For the first time in my life, teachers actually mostly liked me. And while I want to say that a lot of it simply had to do with the fact that the teachers at the school took a genuine interest in getting to know the students, I have to wonder now if I was given preferential treatment because of my minority status, because the teachers were all very leftist. It was in high school that I ended up having more and more female friends, which was something that I maintained all throughout college and most of my adult life. I always felt that women were easier to confide in as a gay male. Certainly more so than other gay men, especially early on, due to the worry of sexual tension. Granted, I would say most gay guys got along with girls pretty well, but in adult life, there are definitely gay guys who get into a zone where they don't really hang out with women, and are often kind of rude to women at gay bars, for example. But I was always one of the most welcoming gay guys around when it came to women. I often figured I should make a specific point to talk to the only female in the room if it seemed like maybe she felt awkward. It's just the type of guy I am, naturally. However, in 2015, things started to get a bit weird when numerous women began trying to basically take over spaces that were founded to be for gay men, usually for gay men basically exclusively, such as leather bars and Radical Fairy Commune Land. I have a video about the Radical Fairies if you are curious about what that is. It wasn't enough for these lesbian, bisexual, and non-binary identified women to be included into various spaces that were designated to be exclusively for gay men, usually. I didn't really have a problem with them being included at all, despite the fact that a lot of older gay guys warned me very directly that if I ever let too many women into what they called faggot space, there could be problems, they told me. But I felt a mix was healthy. However, after a while, it became apparent that a large percentage of these women wanted a certain level of authority over the gay men within the gay male spaces. These women started ordering everybody around in the typical ways that you can imagine, in terms of language policing and hypersensitivity to potential sexual contact. And if there was ever a conflict and the women didn't get their way, they'd call everybody misogynists and try to get them banned from the spaces, often succeeding. This happened at a few bars that I witnessed it at personally, where female-centered nights wreaked havoc as the humorless and irritable lesbians and non-binary women could not get along with the regular, mostly male clientele at the bars who mistakenly casually entered into the once-a-month unofficial Female Friday or whatever. And I was even banned personally from an online forum that was designated to be for gay men after being repeatedly and for a prolonged period of time attacked with gendered insults from several different man-hating women. I was banned simply because I used the word cunt as a response eventually, and it turned out that a lesbian was in charge. As a result of being banned from the online forum in spring of 2015, I finally learned about intersectionality theory, which was becoming the law of the land in basically every aspect of LGBT culture. At which point, I began researching intersectionality and intersectional feminism very heavily, because I had a lot of free time on my hands at the time, and I figured that it was always good to be ahead of the game. At first, I thought the idea seemed fair enough, though it seemed like it should be common sense, as, obviously, somebody with multiple forms of minority or disadvantage status would face distinct hardships in life. But I began to become extremely skeptical of it all when it became abundantly clear that there was seemingly not an intersectional feminist alive who was writing honestly about the intersecting hardships of men. As a gay guy, of course, it seemed rather odd to me because every gay guy alive knows that gay men are far more likely to suffer from a violent or even non-violent attack than a lesbian, not to mention sodomy laws, HIV, and more religious persecution than lesbians face. And no, I'm not saying that anecdotally. You can look into the FBI reports for hate crimes if you want to know. Still, I kept reading the blogs and watching videos. Just once would I have loved to find an article that honestly talked about the various female or femme privileges that people might at least occasionally get, but such articles seemed not to exist. Instead, I was only able to find countless articles about how femme privilege is not a thing. There's no such thing as female privilege, said article after article. or articles about masculine privilege within the queer community were abundant. At this point, while I was growing more and more skeptical of feminists as a population, I was still under the impression that feminism as an overall concept and ideology was a noble one, simply because I knew so many people who identified as feminists that were really great people. Still, I eventually found some anti-SJW videos, like Blair White's one on female privilege, and it was incredibly satisfying. I had basically been waiting for it for months. I realized after seeing Blair White's female privilege video that I hadn't been looking at YouTube enough, and I found what I was looking for: feminist critics. After a few months of looking at various feminist criticism videos on YouTube from people like Christina Hoff Sommers and Sargon of Akkad, some of which I wholeheartedly agreed with, some of which I felt were a bit harsh, I finally ended up really looking into the arguments from MRAs like Karen Strawn and the Honey Badgers, Theron Meyer, Bane666, and Paul Elam. I had never done that, of course. I had never dreamed of giving MRAs a chance. Of course, when I simply bothered to fairly look into their talking points, my jaw dropped. Having come from a more feminist background and knowing several famous feminists, I was honestly rather shocked when I realized that it wasn't simply that feminism was flawed, but that the men's rights people were drastically winning the arguments if anybody actually bothered to thoroughly investigate their claims. Just looking at the stats, like the total victims of violent crimes being mostly men, male suicides being around 78%, and university enrollment being around 40% among countless other issues, looking at that really shocked me, and I assumed in my head that other people would want to know about this stuff, because I know I sure as hell would have listened if one of my friends told me about such things. I actually wondered to myself, why hadn't anybody told me about this? This is crazy. Well, this is where my story turns sour. When I started speaking out about these issues with my friends in my extended social network on Facebook, I was almost immediately blocked by women that I thought were my friends. People I had known in person for numerous years. People that I had gone out of my way to welcome into gay male spaces, like I had talked about earlier. Seriously, imagine how that felt to me. These were women who had been a minority at social functions where there were at least 10 men for every woman, and I had been one of the only guys who was nice enough to go out of my way to befriend them. But then years later, the second I even mentioned male issues, they were willing to block me on social media. It turned out, as I realize now, that a lot of the women who make it a point to hang out with gay men a lot are really just mostly straight women who have an issue with straight men. And they are almost unanimously feminists, because man-hating people tend to be feminists. It's just the thing. So when these women hear that gay guys are acknowledging male issues, they lose their shit. It's like they expect gay men to unanimously side with the feminist narrative. I don't know, something about patriarchy hurting gay men? I don't know. And it's apparently a major threat to them when we don't, as you can tell from the massive vitriol and complete dismissal feminists always put forth towards Milo Yiannopoulos and probably even Dave Rubin, complete with the typical lies about them. It became apparent at that point, and from basically every interaction I have had with a feminist ever since, that if I did not make it explicitly clear to these women that I am an ally in whatever feminist struggle they are attempting to engage in, be it freeing the nipple to the quest for feminist world domination, if I was not a direct ally of theirs who peddled the script that women are unanimously oppressed and men are unanimously privileged, I was not just of no use to them, but much worse. I was a horrible traitor and a direct thorn in their side. I absolutely believe that there are countless self-identified feminists who love gay men, But from my experience, those ones tend to sit back and not say anything when a guy like me gets attacked by one of the aggressive feminists who thinks that I must be a horrible, ungrateful misogynist for questioning the overall narrative of feminism and patriarchy, or telling these women that they aren't helping me by shaming gay men for our dating preferences or masculine characteristics, or all the other things that feminists actually shame gay men for. It's pretty common. You see, not only are a growing number of feminists seeming to feel betrayed by gay men, but I'm pretty sure that once we stop peddling their talking points and instead maybe stick up for male issues, feminists at this point realize quickly that we are a chink in their armor of the feminist narrative, and then they are perfectly willing to attack us with extra vehement vitriol that I am sure you are now familiar with as an individual. At which point, they don't just call us neckbeard dude bros that can't get laid to dismiss us in the way that they would to a straight guy. It's much worse. Over and over, when I've argued with feminists online about gender issues, they've now taken to not just making up all sorts of absurd accusations about me, like I'm sure you've experienced by now, but they've started to become very blatantly homophobic. Seriously, the worst homophobia I've gotten over the past year has been 100% unanimously from feminists. They say that I must think vaginas are disgusting, that I have mommy issues, that I must have a crush on Milo Yiannopoulos, that I must only be gay because I can't get women. Things that could be really offensive to certain guys who don't have a thick skin like I do. Honestly, it all just reeks of mean girls style bullying nonsense from people who know that the odds are in their favor, but simply aren't particularly moral people. So they don't want to adapt their positions because for whatever individual reason they have grown accustomed to their position of, dare I say it, privilege. This position that the feminist narrative has afforded them. They'll not just deny that they are in this position of privilege, but they'll vehemently and viciously attack anybody who casually mentions what is really happening. Kind of like what happened with Anita Sarkeesian and VidCon. Just me saying, hey, men have issues too, I can list a few. Just saying that will quite literally lead to feminists making jokes about my sexuality as a gay man, which is really ironic considering that they have been saying for decades that feminists are the ones fighting for gay rights, and now we should owe them or something. So yeah, it's like, why were they helping gay men? Were they just doing it so that they could get power? It sort of seems like that. That's where, when I had that realization, was when I just kind of could not do it anymore, and I had to speak out. So yeah, I figured after the way that you have been attacked recently that you could relate to this story. So if you ever want to do a live stream or something, I'd be open to that. And for the rest of you lot, drop me a comment. Be like these people if you want to, and stay tuned.